Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Your Glassdoor Profile, How to Use It to Your Advantage. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. You can connect to audio using your computer's microphone and speakers, or you may select Use Telephone after joining the webinar. All lines will be muted to avoid background noise, and you can ask questions at any time by typing them into the question pane. I'd like to invite you to join the conversation socially by using our hashtag GDChat for any questions or comments throughout the presentation. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Katie Burke, Vice President of Culture and Experience at HubSpot, and Molly McKinstry, Enterprise Client Partnerships Manager at Glassdoor. Without further ado, Molly, off to you.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. We are certainly excited about the agenda that we have lined up and are looking forward to a really productive discussion, of course, with Katie from HubSpot as well. So I'll just quickly take you through the agenda so we know what we're going to cover during the time. First, we're going to talk about employer brand and how it has truly evolved as a new job function. Many of you on the line today may have the words employer brand in your role and in your job title. So we're certainly going to talk about that and how that has come to life. We'll talk a little bit about what is an employer brand and really how you all as, ambassadors of your own organization can help shape that employer brand and really make the most of the channels available for you to tell that story. We'll talk about the challenges that employer brand professionals, potentially like yourself, are facing, and we'll hear from Katie really to give us some firsthand advice as how she's gone about that at HubSpot. We'll talk about the benefits of a strong employer brand, offer some pro tips, and then certainly have a conversation spotlight specifically to HubSpot and some of the great things that their organization is doing. We will end with some Q&A if there is time, so please do put your questions into the webinar, and we will make sure to get those covered as time allows. So we'll really just jump into it. An employer brand as a new job function. And I think it's important to take a couple of minutes to discuss the emergence of this and the reality of it as a job function because it's pretty critical. What you'll see is the lines are blurred. So we have a quote from Colin Day, founder and CEO of iCIMS, who said, "Successful hiring companies realize that recruiting is like marketing. From creating a brand experience to attracting candidates through multiple advertising channels to even nurturing applicants by bringing them seamlessly through a talent acquisition funnel." So anybody familiar, with kind of marketing 101 would know that many of these phases are very similar to how marketers think. And we are seeing the lines really continue to blur between marketing and recruiting, and it's evident in emerging hybridized marketing and recruiting employer branding roles at companies, really created to bring these two together. Just a kind of quick anecdotal story, at Glassdoor, we have recently hired our own head of employer brand, and it is kind of funny because it was a recent hire, and if you think of Glassdoor as really helping to pioneer the importance of employer brand, but as we continue to grow and competition for talent has become that much fiercer, we've recognized the need for having an in-house expert solely focused on employer brand. So she manages our brand as it relates to not only attracting talent, but how it integrates with our overall consumer brand as well, really, again, bringing back the idea that marketing and recruiting are not, kind of operating in and of themselves, and the two really have become more hybridized. So let's talk now about jobs and really their behavior, because ultimately, they are consumers. And decisions today are wildly different than, they were not a long time ago. 5 to 10 years even. And how we successfully attract talent has also had to change with that. So, with more access to information than ever before, job seekers are now carefully considering their choices. They are visiting up to 18 sources before applying for a job, which is pretty incredible when you think of a consumer, not a job seeker. They're going to visit at least 3 websites prior to making a decision. So you're actually going to see that number multiply by 6 for a job seeker before they ultimately decide to apply for a job. And they want to learn critical information about a company before applying, interviewing, and ultimately accepting an offer. They want a window to learn what it's really like to work for an organization. And it makes sense. They want to get a feel for the company culture, leadership team, career advancements opportunities before applying or accepting that offer. And this is very similar to how consumers behave. They want to know what they're going to get from the product that they're ultimately engaged with. And there's no more important product, and we'll certainly talk about this throughout today's discussion, than your job. So I think keeping that top of mind really gets us further into the employer brand discussion, and the fact that we lean on peers for advice when making decisions. We live in a transparent world, transparent culture, and people ultimately expect that. And I obviously worked at Glassdoor, so I would say, that's a great thing, and that's actually okay, and we'll talk about that today as to really why. But, these are obviously brands that we're familiar with, Amazon, Airbnb, and they have really helped continue to bring this concept of transparency to other markets, retail, travel, and Glassdoor is really doing that again for employment. So when you think about it, we have lived in a reviews culture for a long time. So much like Amazon and Airbnb, Glassdoor really is seeking to empower job seekers and employees through information transparency. People consult online sources in a variety of realms throughout their life, which is no surprise why people then rely on this information to make important decisions about where to work. I would argue critical, life-changing decisions about where to work. And issues of trust are relevant to both employees and consumers because, as now we've said a few times, every employee is also a consumer, and we as a culture are more likely than ever to consult the opinions of our peers before making a decision. So let's talk about work and how it has truly evolved to a lifestyle brand. This is a quote from Josh Bersin, which says, tech has eliminated the barriers between work and life. Employers are trying to figure out how to make work easier and more meaningful to people to attract both the very ambitious that want to really move up and drive change and ultimately run things, and then the people who want to work hard but not ruin their lives. And so as we're living in this transparent world, in part very much because of how technology has transformed how we make decisions, technology has also transformed the way we work. We do, for better or worse, live in an always-on world. And so the convergence of life and work is a very, very real thing. So what does that mean for your company? It means a couple of things. It means that you're no longer selling a job where you punch the clock and you leave. And again, being from Glassdoor and as impassioned as I am, I think that's an amazing thing. That's a really profound and wonderful thing. But it also means that our jobs, those of us are on the phone, and our executives and our colleagues, it just became that much more important because really we're selling a lifestyle brand where life and work are going to merge. The whole person is going to show up to the office every single day or to their desk if they're working remotely, and it's no longer just an employee versus that person and the rest of their life. So where you go to work is one of the most important decisions that you make. I don't think that many would argue that. And the reality is that we spend more time at work than we do many other things, including, with family, with friends, with loved ones, with, doing hobbies or things that, aren't work. So it's really important that more important than ever to make the right decision. and your company has to resonate with job seekers and consumers on a personal level. So let's talk about what is an employer brand. And I think this is a question that I get a lot. So let's talk about it. As we have established, candidates are consumers too, and they want to get to know your brand, and they are looking in a variety of places to learn about you. If you remember, we just said 18. So it's ever important that you're not only aware of what an employer brand is, you're aware of what your company's employer brand, what that is, and where is that story being told. So why do we need to build a powerful brand in order to attract and retain the best talent? And I'm actually going to hand it off to Katie here briefly, because I think she's a pretty good expert on this, and then we'll hear from her and see what she has to say.
Thanks so much, Molly. I have good news and bad news for everyone on the webinar. The good news is that you have more tools than ever to amplify your employment brand. The bad news is that you're not in control of all of them. Your candidates and employees are, along with the alumni of your company. So for a bit of context, prior to being the VP of Culture and Experience at HubSpot, I'm a career marketer. So I knew more about kind of the marketing side before running culture and experience at HubSpot than I did the traditional HR side. And one of the observations we've had about the world of marketing is fundamentally the way in which people shop and buy has changed. And as Molly mentioned, the way in which candidates seek out job opportunities has fundamentally changed too. So it used to be that employers had all the power, right? You could create pamphlets and brochures and just basically manufacture your employment brand. So even if the rhetoric didn't meet the reality, it would be really hard for candidates to know that unless they had a friend or colleague or family member who worked in the company. Now, with the proliferation of technology and social media, it's easier than ever for candidates to get information about what it's actually like to work at your company. What does your employment brand actually represent? What does that look like? That sort of thing. And so for those of us who care deeply about employment brand, there's great news, which is to say it's front and center and has more of an impact than ever on how candidates think about their job choice. The bad news is you need to be comfortable sharing control and thinking about it as a collaborative effort. So the way that I typically explain it to people is that at HubSpot, while I run the team that focuses on our culture, our employees, candidates, and alums are really the ones who create our employment brand. So to give you a concrete example, I talk a lot about how I want HubSpot to be a destination for working parents in tech, which is obviously, for all the reasons Molly mentioned, a bit of a challenge. Tech can be really demanding. There's a lot of fast-paced moving parts at a tech company, that sort of thing. So I can say a lot when I talk at webinars. I can talk a lot about it on our career site, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's the Glassdoor reviews from the parents who work here and their social media channels that really make the biggest impact. So one of the things, we had Take Your Kids to Work Day here yesterday, and one of the things we consistently hear from parents is you could have written whatever you wanted on your website, but reading a Glassdoor review from a parent and seeing his or her picture showing that their child was welcome at work and how much you do to invest in working parents, that's what ultimately made me make the decision to join HubSpot. So we'll talk a little bit more about what employment branding includes, but the fundamental premise to me that's most important to keep in mind is that you can't own it in an ivory tower. You need to think of it as a collaborative team sport.
Katie, that was pretty much spot on, and I think a really good segue into this pretty famous quote by Jeff Bezos, of course, from Amazon, that your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think that example is pretty much spot on if you think of the parents at HubSpot and what they'd be saying about their experience. So, zooming out a little bit, your brand is being driven by what people are saying, of course, when you're not in the room, and where are they saying it? And of course, your Glassdoor profile is one of those places, one of many, on a variety of social media channels. So there's a couple of things that you need to understand. First, what your current employer brand is and how you can be part of shaping that. And even if you don't like what the current employer brand is, or you don't believe it, really is representative of what you're trying to achieve in an organization, that's okay. We have to start somewhere. So let's dive into what an employer brand is comprised of and the ways you can build and manage that brand specifically on Glassdoor, but also in the day-to-day of your organization. So first and foremost, your reputation, right? An employer brand is just that. It is your culture, your mission, your values, your people. Your brand is defined and driven by your employees. So this is a critical part of your overall brand strategy. And Katie said it can't be in an ivory tower. It can't be rhetoric. It has to be the reality of the day-to-day. So developing an effective employer brand is really the foundation of an effective recruitment strategy. And I think all of us can agree that with a powerful reputation comes quality candidates. Your employer brand is your reputation, so if you do not define it, someone else will. With, of course, the rise of social media, many of us are familiar with it, and some of us, live in it daily for our jobs. Your message is out there whether or not you want it to be, and that again is okay. That is okay. That is a good thing. If you think of the transparent world that we live in and how empowered consumers are and now job seekers are, that's okay. We can't ignore it. But it also means, to Katie's point, how do we collaborate? How do we have this shared control and get our message as employers and organizations alongside what is already being said? So part of your employer brand is about the sentiment of course, potential applicants, current applicants, and your employees. However, it's really critical to add your perspective and measure progress over time with your employer brand. So this is something that, we talk about a lot with our clients at Glassdoor, which is the power of the employer voice alongside the voice of employees, job seekers, and job candidates. We know from surveying Glassdoor users that 90% of candidates say that the employer's perspective does matter and is going to impact the choice that they ultimately make. But it also means that they're being thorough in their research. So for anybody on the line, and it's okay if you are this person that feels like the idea of social media or Glassdoor is still kind of scary, it's still kind of unnerving, it makes you feel vulnerable and you don't like it, this is really the first step to overcoming that, because your voice can be here, it should be here, and we really want to arm you with the tools of, what to say. So next piece of what an employer brand is your culture. I have to say, I think culture has kind of evolved in I think just for me in the role that I'm in the last couple of months is really this enigma. What is culture? It is this huge word. It means so much, but how do you define it? How do you measure it? How do you impact it? And it's a massive challenge right now. CEOs and HR leaders recognize that culture drives people's behavior, their ability and willingness to innovate, their ability and willingness and desire to provide good customer service. 82% of leaders believe that company culture will give them a competitive advantage. And there are many statistics to support that they are absolutely correct. But it doesn't mean that it is easy to know what that culture is and to shape that culture. So with that, and actually as a result of that, 87% of organizations are citing culture and engagement as one of their top challenges. And this is from Global Human Capital Trends for 2015. So this is real. 87% of cultures are saying this is a really big challenge. How do we engage our employees? How do we decide what we're going to be about? And, this is due largely in part to the fact that it's not fully understood, this notion of culture. Many companies are really finding it difficult to measure and manage, which is why it is imperative to proactively define culture and success measures. Because if you don't, it's going to happen on its own. It's going to come, and without having that proactive strategy, you may not have the results that you ultimately need for a successful recruitment strategy and a successful long-term business plan. So I'll give you a quick example. At Glassdoor, we do have what we call, in quotes, build your own desk culture. And, this really came from the very early days, kind of the inception of the organization, where employees actually built their own desk. Literally, they built it. And so we have now, of course, evolved and There's no building of the desk really anymore, but it doesn't mean that that as the backbone of our culture has changed, and actually it certainly has not, thank goodness. So we have now defined codes of engagement around this statement, and we've really created this list of qualities of we are and we are not. And for instance, an example is we are humble, but we are not arrogant. We are scrappy. We are not lazy. And we do have this posted around the office, and it helps everyone keep the culture front of mind. But I say that with a grain of salt because I think, you'll hear it's not about the posters. It's not about, it's hanging on the walls. But when you're living it daily and when it's coming from your employees, from your peers, from your colleagues, having it there actually as a reminder really just further cements what we are about as an organization. So that being said, you do not have to be Glassdoor or Google or Facebook or HubSpot to have a great culture. Chances are your company does have a culture that is unique and special on its own. But it's all about identifying what is already working for your organization and, where is there room for opportunity to improve and how do you do it? So just some quick examples. Investing in your culture, it can take many shapes, from celebrating employees, having meaningful recognition programs in place, wellness programs, investing in the quote-unquote whole person versus just the person who shows up and punches the clock. Because as we know, that's just not the world we live in any longer. Okay, so the next piece. What is an employer brand? We've talked about your reputation. We've talked about your culture. It is also your mission and your values. And these two things, mission and values, again, kind of big words, a lot of hidden meaning, but really they should instill purpose, inform behavior, motivate through tough times. And I think that is a huge piece to call out. I think all of us have probably seen at our organizations, whether current or former, times that have been harder than others, whether it be because of reorgs or, financial reports or whatever it may be. And the mission and the values have to be there. They have to be real in order for not only your employees to kind of persevere through, but the organization as a whole to do the same. So your mission and your values, it should empower your employees, right? We just talked about that. And not only job seekers looking. So, I think that's what we think about naturally, the job seeker, and very much it's kind of the reason that we're here today, but it's also potential investors. It's potential customers who are, evaluating a proposal from you and trying to understand what you're all about. And they're really making decisions of whether or not to invest, whether or not to do business based on what is your mission, what is your purpose, what do you stand for, what are your beliefs. It's critical to have a mission statement that your employees stand behind and believe in. And again, not to have one, not to just hang it on the wall, but because it really is what gets people out of bed every day. And even on the toughest day, maybe the worst of days, it grounds them to be there to do good work and to represent, the overall future of the organization. It informs behavior, hiring decisions, it motivates teams. I could just go on and on, but I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask Katie to jump in because I know she's got great firsthand examples.
Oh, Molly, this is an example so near and dear to my heart because when I meet with organizations to ask about their mission and values, one of the things that comes up is they're like, oh gosh, Molly, yes, of course we have one, that sort of thing. And Jeff Bezos, our CEO here at Amazon, can recite them. And part of the reason why Amazon is so successful and why I admire them so much is it's not just Jeff Bezos and his C-suite of leaders who can recite what their mission and values stand for. It's their entire company. And so one of the things I would encourage folks on the phone to do, I know we have a lot of employment brand leaders, HR leaders, marketers, people ops folks, recruiters, that sort of thing, is ask yourself the fundamental question about your mission and values. If your newest and most junior employees cannot recite what your mission and values stand for to someone who's a complete and total stranger, then you're sort of missing the point. And so from my perspective, what I hope is most compelling for people who meet folks from HubSpot in the wild is not what I say about culture, but rather what that individual says, whether they were an intern, a co-op, a senior software engineer, or one of our C-suite members. And so I think you can't over-communicate what that means, and you can't make it authentic enough to the extent that you make sure that the newest and most junior members of your team can really recite it comfortably. To me, you can't be, as you mentioned, in the room every time someone's talking about your employment brand. So it's absolutely not good enough if your C-suite, executive leaders, HR department, or marketing team can recite what your mission and values stand for, but your newest interns or the guy who was hired 2 weeks ago can't. So to me, that's the best litmus test for how your organization is actually doing on this metric, not what you put on your Glassdoor page or what you put on your career site. But if you were to walk up to someone on the street and say, hey, you're 3 days into your career at X company, how's it going and what do they stand for as an organization? That person should be able to answer with enthusiasm and confidence. So that's kind of a good litmus test as you're leading the call to think about. If your employees can't currently do that, you have some work to do to kind of fill in the blanks on that delta.
Yeah, and thanks, Katie, because that's really a perfect segue to the fourth kind of pillar of the employer brand, which is our people. You know, I mean, our people are the biggest brand asset. They're obviously the biggest asset for a variety of reasons to most organizations, but in terms of your brand, I mean, they are so impactful and can have so much influence. They are the most powerful voice in your arsenal, and they are trusted. Their employees are actually ranked among the most trusted influencers when communicating about their company's engagement and integrity. In fact, they are 3 times more credible than the CEO. So to Katie's point exactly, you know, I think all of us probably work for an organization who the CEO or members of the C-suite can talk about the benefits of working at the organization, but most of us expect them to do that. That's the role that they are in, you know, but it's about everybody else. And what we do know is that engaging brand ambassadors will really be a game changer for you as an employer. When employees share content, this is from Denise Holt of Collaborative Inc., but I find this just so interesting because she's saying when employees share content, from their experience, it is receiving 5 to 10 times the amplification rate than brand shared content. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't continue with brand shared content. You should not continue to invest time and resources there. But to think that the power of your employees and their voice is not as strong and ultimately stronger, you know, that's just not accurate. So we've got to think about it in a new way, and we've got to get on board. You know, something else that I think is important to talk about is how to better understand your overall employer brand and how to identify who are our potential brand ambassadors, who are these champions within our organization, you know, that really have this organic, natural, powerful story about what working here means for them, and let them share it. You know, and I'll give you an example, right, where we're talking about how to utilize the Glassdoor profile to you know, amplify your employer brand. So in a lot of ways, this is the perfect platform to showcase your people because, you know, we are really the place where job seekers go to get that inside look of what it's like to work at an organization. So they're fully expecting to hear from your employees, of course, with the reviews, which are anonymous, but it does not mean as an employer that you shouldn't take full advantage of utilizing that space as well to have the candidate hear from your employees. And some of the best employer profiles on Glassdoor showcase employee testimonials, you know, meet the team, video clips or photos. Sometimes there's employee guest blogs, you know, with a personal email address or, you know, a link to a social media profile for that individual that just gives the candidate, the experience of, wow, they really care about their people. These people are pretty empowered. How awesome that this person got the chance to tell this story. I'd love to be a part of that. And 2, don't forget, it makes your employees feel pretty great too, because they now get the sense that, wow, my voice matters, my opinion matters, my organization cares not only what my experience is, but they want me to share it. And giving people that opportunity is really powerful, and it's only going to help continue to cultivate, you know, what the employer brand is at your organization. So let's talk now about the idea of trust and the fact that strong employer brands build trust. You know, and we've talked about it briefly, but the other piece of this is that your company reputation, it affects decisions by a variety of groups and not just job seekers and job candidates, investors, partners, clients, customers, all of these folks are making decisions about whether or not they want to, engage with your organization based on your reputation. So as you can see here, this is an Edelman study, and it found that 63% of consumers will not buy a product or service from a company that they do not trust. 63%, over half. But then conversely, 80% of consumers, 8 out of 10, they intentionally choose to buy from a company that they do trust. And then furthermore, they will go out of their way to recommend those companies to others. So the potential for building brand ambassadors here is exponential, right? I mean, we're talking consumers and, the use of products, but then go back to the notion of all of us spend more time, working in our job than ultimately doing anything else. So how do we utilize this and really shape and create brand ambassadors? Responding to someone's feedback can not only make that individual feel heard and valued, but it increases their engagement with your brand. And, again, this is absolutely something that we'd recommend that you do on Glassdoor because it impacts the reach even further. One review on Glassdoor, be it, positive or developmental, if the employer takes the time to respond to that review and to think of the job seeker or the candidate reading that review, it makes individuals feel valued, heard. It makes them more engaged with your brand, and it will also prove the type of company that you are, which, by the way, looks like you're open. It looks like you're transparent. It looks like you're willing to admit, there are things that we are working on, and we are eager to have you as part of that journey. So that's really what makes up this, concept of an employer brand. But now let's talk about what's the benefit of having a strong employer brand. And many of you on the phone who work at organizations and represent companies that already have one, this. And for those of you that aren't quite there yet, this is what you have to look forward to. First and foremost, it makes hiring easier. More than 67% of employers believe that retention rates would be higher if candidates had a clearer picture of what to expect about working at a company before they took the job. And, I think this is, again, a little bit of almost a taboo topic, because it's this notion of total transparency and the fact that it is okay for job seekers to self-select themselves out of the process. And, we go as far as to say it's not only okay, it's what you want, because it'll save you time, it will save that candidate time, and the sooner you both know, hey, this may not be a right fit for either one of us, the better. The more time you have to go find the right folks. So, with a very transparent, contextualized view of what it's like to work at your company, candidates will begin to self-select out of the application process if it's not offering what they're looking for. And like I said, this is absolutely an okay thing, and it's going to help increase the applicant quality that you're seeing, and ultimately it will lower your cost per hire because you will not have to invest as much to attract the wrong people. Right? We want to be smart about our resources. I never get on the phone with a client who's told me their budget has doubled. And so we need to be smart, and we want to make sure that our message is getting to the right folks. I'll give you one quick example. Enterprise Rent-A-Car, who has an incredibly strong employer brand. This is something that they see a lot of success in. And through the partnership that they have with Glassdoor, they were able to make over 650 hires at an incredibly low cost per hire, less than $200 per hire in less than a year. So, of course, there's many factors that go into that, but it cannot be ignored that the power helping them two pretty critical pieces of, the overall recruitment experience and, really benefits of a strong employer brand. It is imperative to develop and communicate a strong sense of purpose within your employees. you know, employees, investors, partners, customers. We've talked about it, but it matters. Employer brand is touching everybody who is engaging with your brand. So a company's mission really is its reason for being. It is why we as an organization choose to exist. It is why people come in 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. It is the reason we are here. It gives employees a sense of purpose, and it really motivates them to come in every day, you know, beyond the paycheck. I think one of the, you know, as a people leader myself, I think one of the scariest things about my job would be the day my folks are you know, signing in or coming to the office solely for a paycheck. You know, that's not going to be good for anybody, and you need to bring it back constantly. To Katie's point earlier, you know, what's the mission? What are we here for? So let me tell you why this is a massive benefit. Research shows that mission-driven companies have 30% higher levels of innovation and 40% higher levels of retention. And they tend to be first or second in their market segment. So, you know, now we're talking about productivity. We're talking about the things that typically get attention from our C-suite. You know, it is going to have an impact on our ability, your ability to be successful as a business. A strong mission and values are things that potential investors, customers, and job seekers are looking at when they are evaluating whether or not to invest with you. So it's just to overlook this as a benefit it can't be done. And to think of what your organization can do from an innovation perspective and a retention perspective, it's powerful stuff. So it's worth spending the time to understand. Talking about, you know, better business performance really is the segue here to another benefit of a strong employer brand. This is something that, you know, has been really of great interest to Glassdoor. I've been here for 5 years, so certainly as long as I've been here. And as we've continued to get more content, you know, we've really began to understand that there are trends and correlations between company culture and stock performance for those organizations that are publicly traded. You know, we do have a chief economist, Dr. Andrew Chamberlain, on our team who really put this research together and ultimately uncovered that Glassdoor best places to work companies are outperforming the S&P 500 by an average of 122%. So to, again, think that this doesn't have real impact on your ability as a business to perform and deliver, we gotta get rid of that. It's just not right. It's not the case, because we've also evaluated low-rated companies and determined that they underperformed the same S&P 500 by nearly 30%. So why does employee satisfaction matter so much? Because employees who are satisfied, they will build stronger, more innovative, more successful organizations where people are going to want to stay. And that's kind of, you know, the most important thing when you think about all of us and what we get out of bed to do every day. So Katie, I'm going to ask you to chime in here because I know this was something also kind of really personal that you experienced at HubSpot.
Absolutely, Molly. So HubSpot's a public company. We went public in 2014. And when we were preparing for our roadshow, we sort of knew intuitively that culture was a competitive advantage for us. And we really wanted our investors to care about it as much as our customers, our candidates, our employees do, that sort of thing. And what we found ourselves doing was on our roadshow talking to investors about culture. We get a lot of questions about it. And actually some exciting news. In the last month, we had our first analyst report that actually included Glassdoor reviews and how the analyst coverage was thinking about evaluating the company. And so I think it's really cool to see that this is no longer speculation that the street thinks about people as a competitive advantage. It's actually starting to put real numbers and real meat behind it. And so I suspect that more and more analysts will be thinking about and looking at Glassdoor as they think about their coverage. Our new head of IR here at HubSpot used to be an analyst, and one of the ways in which he described Glassdoor was it's one of the only windows you have into what's truly going on in a company. And so it's a great place to grab questions or grab nuggets or trends and that sort of thing. And so I think this is a trend you'll continue to see over time. So this isn't just sort of this soft metric that you can no longer wrap your head around as far as budgetary perspective goes. It's something that creates real returns, not just on the street, but also as far as how your investors or prospective investors might see you.
Yeah, and I think that's really another good segue to what we're going to talk through here, because we know that, with this emergence of employer brand as a department or a role for many organizations, there are still many challenges that many of our clients are facing with this, as kind of their pioneering role and their primary objective. So I'm actually going to ask Katie again to take us through some advice, some things that she has seen in her time, and then, of course, some recommendations, because I know we have many clients grappling with this, and I think it would be great to just have the discussion around what you can do.
Absolutely. So let's start with the elephant in the room, Molly, which is budgets. I know what everyone is thinking. Employer brand sounds really great, but budgets were set last year and/or they barely exist. So how do we figure out what to spend, why, and where do I actually get it? So the first thing I would encourage people to think about is actually not that you can't afford to spend on employment brand, but you can't afford not to. So think about sort of the counter perspective. A study by the Brandon Hall Group estimated that employers who with a strong employment brand are 3 times more likely to make a great quality hire. So think about how much attrition costs your business on a regular basis, or how much kind of making a poor hire impacts your team, their productivity, their overall happiness, that sort of thing. The way that I encourage people to think about lobbying for budgets is not just, hey, this would be nice to have and long-term will help us, that sort of thing. Like any business decision, I find that it's helpful to start with the data. So use that data to your advantage, but also get some data around your candidate funnel. So almost every company I speak to is looking to hire really top quality people. I've never heard someone say, I'm looking for really average people to kind of keep my brand going. Everyone wants to kind of elevate their game. Well, if you want to get to top candidates and get truly top employees, you have to search for them in remarkable ways and really tell a compelling story. And so as you're thinking about your kind of employment brand and creating budget for it, really make a business case. Don't sort of make an HR soft people case for it. And we've used that case to kind of expand and increase and test our budget over time, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. The other thing I would note is that one of the first things you can do to invest in your employment brand is actually free. So you can set up your free Glassdoor account, which is fantastic. We are very proud to be Glassdoor customers and have gotten a ton out of our paid account with them, but some of the best things that you can do is start with a low cost. You can start there and kind of up the ante from there. The other thing I would encourage people to do is use existing channels that you have to spread your message. So for example, when people tell me that they do employment branding but only on their career site, I always smack my head because that's missing the point. If someone's on your career site, they're already pretty low in your candidate funnel. They're already thinking about applying for a job. You actually need to get to the top of the funnel and proactively think about drawing people in. So think about using things like your social media channels, your Facebook page, your Twitter page, whatever the case may be, to really share narratives. So one of the examples Molly mentioned was letting employees take over with a blog post. We let our employees take over our Instagram account and our Snapchat on a regular basis here at HubSpot, and the result is much more authentic content that doesn't cost a lot of money to create but resonates deeply with our audience. The second thing that's often a challenge I find for companies is ownership. So one of the things I hear from people is that employment brand can be a jump ball between recruiting and HR or recruiting and marketing or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, I don't know what the individual case for every single person on the phone is, but here's what I would say about that. I don't think that there is a right or a wrong answer as far as who should own your employment brand. It should fit with kind of how you think about your broader organizational structure. The way that I would think about it is, rather than thinking so much about who owns it and who should own it and bickering about that, think about what really solves for your candidates and for your employees. So from my perspective, one of the things we did was kind of mapped out what channels existed and what our candidate funnel looked like. And then from there, it made it much easier to figure out who operates who and how that's going to work. What we do is we pick our key stakeholders. We actually use a persona strategy. So for example, we have personas for new hires, persona for experienced hires, sort of thing. And we create an employment brand map that kind of maps to all those, and each person owns a different element of the funnel and different teams participate. So I would encourage you to start with your end customer and build out personas from there. Then it doesn't matter as much whether HR, recruiting, or marketing measures it. And we'll talk a little bit about how you actually measure that in just a little bit. So ownership, there's not a clear right or wrong answer. I do think it's important you have one person in your organization who's ultimately solely responsible. What department they sit in is less important than their commitment to solving for your candidates and your customers. So moving on, one of the other questions I get is, okay, This is all great advice, but how does this actually intersect with our broader consumer brand? Like, what's the relationship between employer brand and an actual consumer brand, and how do they interact? So from my perspective, I think actually brands sometimes are a little too worried about making them perfectly intersect and making every brand element perfect. As I mentioned, your employer brand, you have a lot less control over than you might over some of the other brand elements. The way that I think about it is it has to make authentic sense to your candidates and to your customers. So for example, Airbnb talks about belonging everywhere, belonging anywhere rather. Amazon thinks about solving for the customer. You can feel those touch points whether you're on their Glassdoor page or on their homepage making a purchase or booking a reservation. If your brand has a chocolate consumer brand and a vanilla employer brand, you're doing it wrong. But if it feels like different kind of relative flavors or spins on an existing flavor, I think you're in good shape. The way that I think about it is your core DNA should be the same, and your brand mission and your employer brand mission should be roughly aligned. So the stories, the narratives, how they take shape, it's okay if they're more siblings than anything else. They don't have to be identical twins. But I think the way to think about it is that the brand DNA needs to make sense to someone visiting your site or visiting your career site for long term. The other thing to keep in mind is it may make some of the marketers in your group a little bit uncomfortable, but again, you can't own every single touch piece. You can't define talking points for the perfect employer brand, because every single day your employees and candidates are sharing their experience in real time. So be willing to give up some of the control and instead focus on what solves for your candidates and for your customers. And then finally, this is honestly the biggest question I get. People think, they hear my title, they hear that I run culture and experience at HubSpot, and they say, gosh, that sounds really great and cool, but how do you actually measure it? How do you know if you're moving the needle? So for us at HubSpot, our team has 3 core metrics that we focus on. One is actually Glassdoor. So the reason we use Glassdoor is if you hold yourself accountable to a public metric, it's a visible reminder to the entire organization that the way in which people shop and buy for their job positions has fundamentally changed. So in other words, it's a reminder every single time someone sees my quarterly report on what we're doing and what we're working on, they know that we're accountable to an external audience and that that's not something we can control here. And that keeps us really diligent about responding to reviews, being diligent about responding to candidate feedback, and really addressing that feedback quickly. So we really feel like that's important. The second is we ask a 3-question employee net promoter score survey every single quarter. So one of the things, I'm guessing a lot of people on the phone have been through an employee engagement survey before. I can sort of hear your heads nodding on the other side of the phone. I used to use the employee engagement survey at a big company I worked for as a tool, as a catalyst for my naps. I needed coffee afterwards. It was exhausting. And often the data ended up in a black hole, right? You never got to see it as an employee, so you didn't feel that it was really moving the needle. At HubSpot, we want to do the exact opposite. We ask 3 questions, and the primary question that we measure is on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend HubSpot, working at HubSpot, to a colleague or a friend? And so from our perspective, that net promoter score simplicity and the autonomy associated with that survey keeps us really disciplined about innovating and solving for the employee experience on a regular basis. And then the final thing that we measure at HubSpot as it relates to our employment brand is overall retention. So how many employees are actually staying with us to grow their careers? The way that I advise companies to think about it is if you're not helping people grow, they're going to get going. And so from my perspective, you want your retention rate to be comfortable enough that you're still bringing in new candidates on a regular basis and have some level of turnover. So for example, at HubSpot, we really encourage people to think like founders. One of the things I'm most proud of is that a lot of our alums have gone on to found their own companies. And so now I can say to incoming engineers or finance folks or sales folks, hey, we have a cadre of people who have started their own company after learning more about how to run a business at HubSpot. I think that's actually helpful. So the way that we think about our retention goals is not to get that to 100%, but rather to think about a metric that makes sense for us. So believe it or not, culture and employment brand can be measured. You just have to be thoughtful about how you do it and what's right for your organization. At HubSpot, we use those 3 metrics to think about measuring success, and we've had some pretty good luck doing it. So now do we want to transition, Molly, into some actionable tips that people can actually use to get started as they leave our website?
Here, we'll make sure you guys get, really what you need. So first and foremost, in terms of pro tips, you have to be authentic, and Katie just gave us a ton of great insight in what's working for her. But, you really have to be real stories, real photos, responding to reviews, making the experience on your Glassdoor profile, and a variety of other channels that you're using, make it about the job seeker. I'll give you a couple quick examples of a few companies that really have done an exceptional job at showcasing their brand on Glassdoor. So one, HubSpot, of course, they do a really, really great job of posting real photos of employees at work, just being a HubSpot employee. This is what life there is like. Uber is an also really great example of an organization that responds to reviews on Glassdoor, the good, the bad, and the in-between. And I realize that we could have a whole nother webinar, which we do, on how to, respond to your reviews. So that is, definitely a discussion that someone at Glassdoor would have with you, but it's really important that your candidates and your employees know you are here and you are listening. And then finally, Bain & Company, this is really unique, and you don't see this everywhere, but they're using language that makes it about the candidate, their impact, how they stand to benefit versus just who we are at Bain & Company. So you'll just see here a couple of words that jump out at you. Rest assured, you'll make an impact from day one. When you join Bain, you will know exactly where you stand. All of these are really authentic ways for them to be representing their organization. I do want to just ask Katie really quick, if you could just chime in, what about negative reviews? What does HubSpot do when you see negative reviews on Glassdoor?
Great question, Molly. We do two things with negative reviews. We learn from them and we respond. So one of the worst things I think you can do with negative reviews is just to leave them out there and kind of leave people speculating as to whether they're true or not. We have some negative reviews that I think are really authentic and frankly reveal some things that we really, really need to work on, and I spend a lot of time focused on those. And then we have some that I think are a little bit, frankly, unfair. But it's absolutely imperative that we respond to candidates and employees saying, hey, we heard your feedback, here's what we're doing about it. What I often do is try and respond as quickly and politely as possible. And I've also offered many times to take things offline and have a conversation with a candidate or employee about why they feel the way they do. So to give you an example, we actually had someone give a positive review of his experience but didn't end up getting an offer on the candidate side. And we actually ended up sending him a thank you note from him and the recruiter just saying, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to write this up. We're learning from this. Here's how we're getting better, that sort of thing. And so I think really using it as a response to show that you really care and invest, and then also really learning from it. So what we do is we try and circulate those takeaways and things that we can improve upon to our recruiting team and our hiring managers, and it allows us to get better as an organization as we grow.
Yeah, and I know that is, again, something that a lot of employers kind of wonder about and spend a lot of time thinking about. So thank you for sharing. So let's talk about another pro tip. You've got to showcase your brand, right? I mean, that's why you're here. Your employees are here. They've left feedback. Your job seekers are here. This is the opportunity to showcase your brand. So when you go to a Glassdoor employer profile, you'll see, one that is enhanced. There are customized tabs, really showcasing the pieces of their organization or company that are the most important. There's dynamic content. There's company updates and videos, photos. We in a Hootsuite, so there's a link to all social channels. And it really becomes this extension of your career site, but with your employees right next to it. And that's what makes Glassdoor so powerful. We've talked about it already, but it's critical to say responding to reviews, we'd say as a necessity to really showcase your brand and show what you're all about. 62% say that their perception of a company will improve after seeing an employer respond to a review, regardless of the review itself. So for those of us that, when you've got a negative review on Glassdoor and you feel like it's the worst thing ever, know that just by responding, over one individual will have a more positive impression of you as an organization. And becoming an open company. There are a couple of requirements for how to do that, and you'll want to check company details, add photos. There's some pieces to it, but being an open company really just further solidifies the fact that you've embraced transparency. So continuing on showcasing your brand, utilize company updates, tout awards, and product announcements. Make sure that the amazing things that your organization is doing is here, right? I mean, if you're a Fortune 100 best organization, if you're a Glassdoor best place to work, this should absolutely be on your Glassdoor profile. And then, finally, next slide, please, utilize analytics. There are so many great analytics on Glassdoor where you can see demographics of the people coming to your page, profile traffic, your followers, engagement and impression data, on company updates, rating trends. All of this allows you to see, going back to Katie's point on how to measure. This is kind of the helping organizations to understand whether or not it's working, and this is the Pros Word Cloud from HubSpot, and it's a really great way to just show Katie and her team the things that they are doing that their employees love, and that is really helping to showcase and reiterate their brand. So I know we've got about 5 minutes left, and I absolutely want to make sure we get to hear from Katie, and she can continue to share some awesome stories and tips for you all from someone who's in the role and really leading from the front right now on this.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Molly. So I mentioned a little bit about how we think about using Glassdoor previously, but one of the things we use Glassdoor most for is understanding why candidates do or don't choose HubSpot. So for example, candidates who do write a review, it's really helpful for us to understand what resonated with them, what went well, what questions were good, that sort of thing. And then for folks who didn't choose us for whatever reason or who weren't a good match for us, where was the miss? Was it on how we created their candidate experience? Was it on how we sold the job? Was it on salary and benefits? That feedback is really important to us. And so one of the things we make a habit of doing is on a quarterly basis, sitting down with our recruiting team to go, okay, how's this going so far? What are the trends that we're hearing and seeing in the feedback, and how can we improve and iterate? And we're really fortunate that our recruiting team takes this super seriously. Our recruiters are really engaged and excited about learning from experiences. And to be honest, we've had a few instances where recruiters say, gosh, this is such a good learning experience for me because I know how busy I am on a day-to-day basis. But knowing, for example, that a candidate could write up a review is a really powerful motivator to make sure that I get it right on a day-to-day basis. So really holding your recruiting leaders and hiring managers accountable is one way in which we think about using Glassdoor on a day-to-day basis. If you head to the next slide, one of the mistakes I see people making often on Glassdoor or on their careers page is using really flowery language and this, dignified rhetoric to describe their day-to-day place of work. You showed one of the pictures of our Waffle Wednesday tradition here, which is, I understand that they also have an open table, which is really cool. From our perspective, the Waffle Wednesdays of the world, this silly tradition, so you showed a picture earlier of our Singapore lunch, and it was our managing director sitting aside 2 lion dance performers. It's a little bit silly and goofy, but it shows kind of what it's like on a day-to-day basis when people are here. And to me, using language, photos, stories, narratives, and examples that candidates can really understand and relate to is imperative. So if you're using jargon that's all inside baseball and not really clear to people on how they would actually fit in at the company or how they could contribute, I think that's a missed opportunity. And so one of the things we try and do is showcase what it's really, really like versus this fancy, flowery rhetoric on what it looks like. And then next, how to get started. So you may be thinking, gosh, there was a lot of data on this webinar, there was a lot to do, there was a lot to think about. One of the things that I always think about or advise companies to do when they're getting started is to set an expectation internally within your company that you can't control a transparent marketplace. So our team never comes to me and says, hey, can we get this negative Glassdoor review that sounds really true taken down? Because they know exactly what we're dealing with, and they know that we've made a commitment to that transparency and that innovation. So setting that expectation means that you can control the message that you put on your company page, and you can control your response, but you can't control what other people say. So making sure that you're really comfortable about that. The other thing is Glassdoor is not a set it and forget it tool. It can be, but I think it's most useful when you really set aside the time to monitor and respond to reviews. So one of the things I do is I put time in my calendar every single week to monitor the analytics behind our Glassdoor page and also to respond to reviews. Setting that in someone's calendar on your team to be diligent about it and responsive is absolutely imperative to your success. Molly, I think we're short on time, so I'm going to hand it back to you to wrap up so we make sure we get folks out of here so they can get started innovating on their own employment brands.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Katie. I don't know if we do have any questions, and I'll let the Glassdoor team certainly chime in if we do, but all of you on the line today, just thank you so much for attending. Hopefully, you know, there was some relevant information and you feel like you have some tools that you can now take back to your day-to-day and your organization to just make the most of your employer brand.
Great. Thank you, Molly and Katie, for sharing all of these amazing insights. We don't want to take too much of your day, but we will take a few moments to answer a couple of questions. Before we get to the questions, we will be sending out the recording and slides within 24 hours, so you will have access to those shortly. So Molly, first question for you. What can we do to avoid losing good candidates from applying if we are currently working on improving our brand?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's, you know, feedback we hear all the time. So I think the first thing that you want to do with, you know, your candidates and even your employees is to understand, you know, we are a work in progress, as all job seekers are. I mean, no company is perfect, and I think that it's really important as you continue to evolve and grow as an organization that you're promoting that throughout the interview process, throughout the recruitment process. You know, so when you have a job seeker or a candidate and, you know, maybe you're sitting down in an interview, we would say, let's talk about the things as a business that, you know, maybe you've struggled with and some learnings from that and programs that you're putting in place now to try to get better. And this is where I think you can go back to the self-select idea for your job seekers, because for some individuals, being a part of, you know, kind of an organization under construction, if you will, that may not be what they're looking for. And they quite honestly may not have the grit that you need them to help shape and improve that brand. But for others, this may be exactly what they're made of and the role for them. They want to roll their sleeves up. They want to get in. They want to be highly impactful. So letting them know, hey, we've got work to do, and these are some things that we're focused on. They may love that, and the candidates that love that seem like that'll be the right fit for your business.
Great, thank you. And kind of snowballing off of that, how can we engage employees to continue to improve our brand on our Glassdoor page?
Yep, another great question, and one we get all the time. So, you know, we would absolutely recommend that you do identify, you know, brand ambassadors, and you leverage hiring managers and departments internally, and you encourage people to give feedback on Glassdoor. And there's certainly a way to do it, a tactful way, the right way, which is, hey, team, we care. We are listening. You know, we want to hire more incredible folks like yourselves, and Glassdoor is a platform where our future employees, your future colleagues, are going. So please take the time and tell us how we're doing. Give us feedback. We're listening. You know, what we actually recommend for our clients or any employer who's, you know, engaged is on employee anniversaries at, you know, after 90-day hiring mark, or, you know, just a variety of different dates for your employees that are meaningful for you as a business. It is a great time to reach out and say, hey, it's been 5 years. Tell us how we're doing. You know, you're a critical member of our team and your feedback matters. Hop on Glassdoor. Your review is totally anonymous, and we are listening. That would be the advice I'd give there.
Awesome. And last question, what would be your advice on how to gain brand ambassadors?
Yeah, and I don't know, Katie, I may actually ask you to answer that one, because I think this is probably more in the day-to-day of what you're doing.
Yeah, so one of the things I think we've done is we've actually not made assumptions around who our best brand ambassadors would be. To be honest, your introverts, your folks who might not actually speak up as much in person could be your best folks. So one of the things that we do is we actually make the recommendation a little bit softer. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that your employees don't want to feel like they're being sold or being asked to be a mouthpiece for you. So I think identifying, as Molly mentioned, some really authentic, natural anniversaries, And we ask, folks after their 90-day anniversary, how are things going? And if it's going really well, hey, if you want to share that with the world, that's great. I think the most important thing is to be authentic. The other thing is to keep in mind is that your candidates really want to see diverse perspectives. So, for example, the people who are most likely to share the most flowery things and are so excitable about our brand, most of our engineers think those things seem fake. And so it's really important to have multiple voices and not necessarily the people who are just most cheery, happy, and outgoing. It's really imperative to engage people across your organization. So don't make assumptions about who would be the best brand ambassadors. I think make sure you have a diverse cross-section and that you're really willing to engage with their feedback. I think those are both paramount.
Great. Thank you both, Molly and Katie, so much. We apologize if we didn't have time to get to all of your questions, but we want to thank you for joining us on our webinar today.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.